Shabbat Shalom. We are coming up on the 4th of July and thinking about America at 250, and Rabbi Schwartzman and I are going to be talking about this over the next few weeks and probably beyond, but one of the things that it has meant to be a Jew in America, and one of the things that has been different, I think, for Jews in this country than in many others is that as Jews in America, we live in a country that has predominantly filled with American Christians. And that is a different kind of Christian than we were hanging out with when we were in Poland, in other places. And that has affected us, certainly as Jews, and the world that we are in. And one of the things that is amazing about it is the ways in which we've been able to interact and intermingle and to talk to one another and to live together. And I don't want to share this without him being here. But Professor Saul Wax has an amazing theory on the ways in which the welcomingness of specifically the Christians in Philadelphia has shaped what it is meant to be a Jew in Philadelphia, and we'll get him to come talk about it because it's awesome. So you ask him about it the next time you see him. So one of the things that we wanted to do and that we do here is we get to interact, we get to talk, we get to learn. And if we want to live in a world where we are building something better together, then it is helpful to understand one another and to talk to one another. And we are very lucky in this community that we have a relationship with a few churches, but Overbrook Presbyterian Church, where we've hosted them, and they've been a part of our community and our lives, and it's been really an amazing relationship. And so Pastor Harrelson is with us today, and what we want to do is we're going to talk a little bit about Christianity. Don't worry, Pastor, you don't have to represent everybody and all Christians everywhere, but what we're doing this weekend is we're talking a little bit about the scriptures that we use and the ways in which we use those scriptures. And then tomorrow, I'm going over to Overbrook Presbyterian Church, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the same thing. Pastor Harrelson, why don't you come up? It's so nice to have you. So Pastor Adam Harrelson is known in some places as me, but smarter and with better hair. And it's hurtful because those places are my house and my wife. But even so, it's still wonderful to have you, Pastor, with us today. So what we want to talk about a little bit, I'm going to ask a couple of questions. I'm going to let you talk. I don't know how they do things at Overbrook Presbyterian, but just so you know, it's basically us and then lunch, right? So, that's who we're standing in between right now.
Great.
A little bit, some more prayers, but then that. So, we're so happy that you're here, and your friendship has been amazing. Let's start out light. So let's get our terms straight. So what I call the Tanakh, which is an acronym for Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. Torah, first 5 books of Moses, Nevi'im, the prophets, and Ketuvim, the writings, right? Proverbs, Psalms, things like that. What do you call them?
Yeah, that's a good question. First, thank you for having me, Charlie Mazel Tov. So, for me, the audience matters here. What you call Tanakh, if I'm in my congregation with people who are less familiar with the Hebrew Scriptures, I will call it the Old Testament.
Okay.
Because that is the common understanding that they have for that set of writings. If I am among colleagues or if I'm in an academic setting, it's called the Hebrew Bible or the Hebrew Scriptures. If I'm in an academic conference that's mostly Christians, we tend to stay away from Old Testament. We might say First Testament, too. If I'm in a room like this, I'll just say Tanakh. But I mean, I think this idea that there's an Old Testament and a New Testament it takes a within Christianity, it takes almost 300 years for that to come to pass. So for the first 300 years of Christianity, the major question about Scripture is not what do we do with the Hebrew Scriptures. Those are ostensibly the Scriptures. Everyone is in agreement about that. The major question is, what do we do about these stories of Jesus, and what do we do about these writings of Paul? Generally, those are the major questions for about 300 years, where everybody is in agreement that the Hebrew Scriptures are Scripture.
So what happens after those 300 years then?
So you have the canonization of the New Testament, basically. So the second set of Scriptures, there are lots of them. Some are very strange. And some, very early, the Christian church says, no, those are not authoritative. Those actually don't count. Some they all are in agreement, yes, these are part of our Scriptures. And then there's always a fuzzy distinction, and to this day there's a fuzzy distinction, right? Like, there are certain Christian Bibles that have apocryphal literature, or sometimes we'll call it intertestamental literature, but that doesn't make any sense here, because there are not two testaments. But you might call it deuterocanonical. Like, there are a number of different names to talk about Maccabees, for instance, Sirach, for instance, all of these.
Okay. So, for microphone's sake, we should look out this way.
This way. Okay, I'm sorry.
You're good. You're
All
fine.
right.
This is logistics, not theology. Can you, knowing it's a general overview, can you give us sort of how then the Hebrew Scriptures, what I call the Tanakh, right? How is that used in Christian theology?
Okay, it's a huge question.
Yeah.
And I have to just preface by saying there's not universal agreement on what I'm about to say. I'm going to give you my particularly Protestant view. If you had a Roman Catholic here or an Eastern Orthodox priest here, they might say something a little bit different. So recognizing that. Not surprisingly, Christian theology is pretty focused on Christ. So,
you're allowed.
I know, you're shocked. So the basic Protestant formulation is this, that gets said, right? Which is that Christ is the revelation of God, and the Scriptures are a witness to the revelation. So that's what the Reformers in the 15th century would say. The Scriptures are not the revelation. They are holy, but they are not divine. They are authoritative, but they are not inerrant. They are not dictated by God, but the work of people. Some of those people are known, some of those people are unknown. Some of these works are edited and compiled over thousands of years. And so, while we have a good sense of what counts as like the center of the Bible, our sense of what's at the edges is very fuzzy. And I can give you examples of that if you're interested. And I think that's true for both Jewish and Christian Scriptures. So the obvious theological move within Christianity is to say, well, the Hebrew Scriptures are in both overt and subtle ways talking about Christ. And this idea would be affirmed by New Testament authors like Paul, who was a Pharisee, scholar of the law. And the basic idea is that there is an anointed deliverer who is going to release the people of Israel. And that anointed deliverer, Christians would affirm as Jesus. All right? So the gospel writers also affirm that this is Jesus. But they also go a little step further, and they say that Jesus is not just the anointed deliverer, this Jesus is also divine. If there is a fundamental theological disagreement between me and most everyone else in this room, it's probably this. Let me just say, this is the most obvious, okay? So, but the problem is that, like, as Christians read the Hebrew Scriptures, we just have to recognize that most of it is not solely concerned with questions of the Messiah.
Right.
It's concerned with lots of different things. It's concerned about the relationship of God with the people of Israel. It's the relationship of God in the created world with the people and their neighbors. It's a set of scriptures that's deeply concerned at times with the nature of suffering, the problem of evil. The role of the Messiah is in there, but a lot is in there, right? So, the Christian scriptures, what we would call the New Testament, are fundamentally concerned with who Christ is and what that means to be the church. But if we only had those scriptures as Christians, it would be very, very hard to arrive at an ethic of ecological stewardship. If we only had the Christian scriptures, we wouldn't have reasons why we care for the world. But the Hebrew scriptures talk endlessly about how to care for the land and the land's role and God's relationship to that land. Those are largely not present with any of the Christian scriptures. So that's one thing. So that if we only had the Christian scriptures, we would be like fundamentally bereft.
Wait, so can I, let me make sure I'm understanding this right, because in the one class I had, I don't know, Rabbi, what they did at seminary when you were there, but we had one day of one class where they mentioned the Christian scripture, and basically it was like Christians use the Tanakh to prove that Jesus was Jesus, and they sort of flattened it to not use anything else. And what you're saying is that was wrong, which is fine. That's okay. Or there's depth. So help me now.
Yeah. So they're not wrong. I mean, I think that throughout Christian history, theologians loved to find obscure passages of the Hebrew scriptures and then devise novel and creative ways about why this is really talking about Jesus.
Okay.
That's really a sort of medieval theological game more than anything else.
Okay.
At this point, that's not generally how theologians and Christians read the scriptures. Now, there are particular scriptures that we would read and say, yeah, that points to Jesus. But on the whole, Christians recognize that the Hebrew scriptures are a lot bigger than just the question of Jesus. And so let me give you another couple of examples. Part of the reason why these set of scriptures are so important to the church. First is that it's not just that they point to Jesus. It's really hard to understand Jesus without them, which is so much of the Gospels and the stories therein are basic echoes of the Hebrew Scriptures. Luke, in particular, loves to steal all of the Elijah and Elisha stories and then just put Jesus in the character of one of the prophets. Right? So very, very, I mean, there's very famously, Jesus goes out and heals a widow's son from the dead. Right? Sound familiar? Yeah. There's a moment where Elisha feeds a multitude with 40 loaves of barley. Right? Again, Jesus then feeds a whole multitude with a small amount of food, right? So to understand Jesus in any real way, you have to understand the context that is making meaning within these stories. The other thing is, and this is maybe one of the most important rationales for honoring and keeping the Hebrew Scriptures authoritative within Christianity, is that Jesus seems to really love these scriptures. That he was a rabbi himself, that he was devoted to them, that he spent his life reading them and learning from them, that they mattered to him, they were authoritative for him, and if they were authoritative for him, they must be authoritative for us.
So, whenever you and I talk, I'm always very impressed with the way that theology is sort of front of your mind, right? And that when you think about, here's where I'm going to reveal something. So the pastor wrote a book called The Holy No. I bought it and read it. It's a good book. It's I don't think I told you that I've read it, but I'm
impressed. You're the one.
Yeah. But it, right, you take in that, like, people dancing in a church as a subversive theological move, right?
Yeah.
And I would be thinking to myself, did we get the chairs out of the way in time? Right? You have theology at the front of your mind when you approach what you're doing. So my question for you, since we're here and we're talking about the Torah, does and how the Hebrew Scripture affect your theological views or the way that you live your life?
Yeah, the answer is yes. So I have to say, I try really hard in my own life not to make a distinction between the Hebrew and Christian scriptures. It's an academic distinction primarily, but it's not a personal distinction to me. Both are authoritative, both are scripture. And truthfully, I tend to hang out, just personally, I tend to hang out with a lot of Hebrew Bible scholars. And so that's generally the stuff we talk about. My best friends spend all of their vocational energy studying these scriptures. And so, but more personally, the scriptures for me, I think there's this idea that when we come to a text, and a text that we recognize as having value or truth, we tend to think that we need to get the truth behind the text, that this text is itself some sort of lockbox, right? And so we can pick the lock, we can open the box, then we can take the meaning out, and the meaning will be the important thing, right? There's a great poem by an American poet named Billy Collins, and the poem is called How to Read a Poem. And the basic idea is, he goes, I try and teach my students to water ski across the surface of a poem, waving to the title on the shore. I try and teach them to be a mouse dropped into the center of the poem and find its way out. And then the end of the poem is, but all they want to do is tie the poem to a chair and beat a confession out of it. I think so often, we come to something that we recognize as valuable, and we're like, just tell me what you mean. Give me the thing that is the meaning. But I'd have to say, as I've grown, my relationship with Scripture has deepened. It is really complicated. And that I take as a sign of my love for it, because any relationship that I have that is full of deep and abiding love is a very complicated relationship. And so instead of thinking about the Scriptures as a lockbox, I'm from California. I spent most of my youth in the Pacific Ocean. I tend to think of it as the sort of ocean that bears you. The thing that you can lean back into and it will hold you. And so, yeah, when I read Scripture, it matters to me because it is, for me, the single place that I have found that has the richest vein of truth and meaning. And it does not matter to me one bit, and I say this honestly, not just for this audience, whether that is coming in the front part of the Bible or the back part of the Bible for me. I think that it is there. Now, some of it is really hard to understand, but it bears attention. And that's the thing I like about it, is that I can keep going back to it over and over and over again, and it will say new things to me. It will have some new meaning to me. And it becomes hard to do that. So take for instance, again, back to the sort of creation thing. Psalm 148, probably my favorite psalm. It's a great psalm. It's a bunch of creatures just praising God. That's the whole psalm, including a sea monster, right? It's great. It says, praise you angels, praise you humans, praise you kings, praise you trees, praise you sea monsters. Everything's praising God. A Hebrew Bible scholar that I like says, Psalm 148 is the best biblical case for the Endangered Species Act. And the point is that when we lose animals, the praise of God decreases. So why should we care about saving bats? It's because they have a role in the creation's song that is sung to God. And so I constantly come to these scriptures, and I find new meaning about how to live my life and how to live in relationship with the people around me.
It's beautiful. And we can talk about sea monsters at Kiddush because I have a whole thought on
Yes.
the Tanini and Gedolim. Let's zoom out a little bit, and again, you speak for yourself and people that you feel comfortable speaking for. How does the use of Hebrew scripture, of the Tanakh in the Christian world, affect Christian thought about us currently? Now,
Yeah.
right? Like, does that question make sense to
Yeah.
everyone, right? In what way does the way that you
Yeah.
read our scripture affect the way that you treat, the Jewett giant or something like that?
No, that's right. I think, so we got to talk about now, but we got a little history beforehand, right? Because sadly, the history of Jewish and Christian relationships has been marked historically by animosity and disproportionate violence
So
from
I've read.
Christians to Jews, right? So just recognizing that, I think we also need to recognize that some, not all, of the Christian scriptures are written and interpreted with an anti-Jewish bias. It's present in some. In other places within the Christian scriptures, it is written by people who understood themselves to be Jews and not just Jews clergy. Right. And so it's the scriptures themselves are kind of all over the place when we're talking about the specifically Christian scriptures. I will also say that the Christian scriptures' deepest vitriol is reserved for Rome. We share that.
Yeah, hey,
That's nice.
we've got something in common.
But as the church becomes increasingly more Gentile over time, it becomes harder and harder to understand why the Hebrew scriptures are relevant to them. Especially, you have these long Levitical laws, right? If you no longer are bound by keeping kosher, then what are the purposes of reading these particular scriptures? Now, I do think that there are purposes there, but they're not immediate any longer. They're not as practical as they once were. And so the commandments that you are reading are no longer as binding as they once were. And so I will say for most of the Christian history too, the church finds very little value in reading Hebrew scriptures with rabbis. This is not true for Jerome. I'll note Jerome, who's the mentor of Augustine in the 3rd century. He tries to, Jerome very famously translates the Bible into Latin, the Vulgate, and has to go and talk to a bunch of rabbis to figure out the Hebrew. Because most of his Christian history, the Christian interpreters, they have a Christocentric way of looking at things, right? And that obviously precludes the rabbis from having a role in the conversation. But on the whole, and we have a little chicken and the egg issue here, right? Which is, I would say that the anti-Jewish bias of the church over time is less informed by the reading of Scripture and more about the preservation of state power.
Okay.
And a state power that specifically licenses violence on minority groups,
Okay.
which a lot of people find very attractive around the world. But that said, about every couple hundred years, there's someone who shows up in the Christian church and finds a following and says, look, you know what? We should get rid of the Hebrew scriptures. And it has never gained traction. The church has always rejected this notion. And to its credit, the church looks and finds inspiration for its life together, for its worship, from the Hebrew scriptures. So, for instance, I'm reading a lot of the Elisha stories. There's Elisha purifies the water of Jericho with some salt. For about 1,400 years before people were baptized, they put salt on their tongue. The liturgies, the Latin liturgies for that period of time, specifically reference Elisha and the purification of the water in Jericho as the beginning purification before the water of baptism washes over the people. So there's a complicated relationship here. Today, as we read Scripture, I think the thing that can bind interfaith relationships most easily is that we do share a text and we can go and read it together. And it's a third thing, right? And you can say, here's what I read into it, and I can say, here's what I read into it, and I can hear you and overhear you, but I don't have to fight you. It's a shared resource in that sense, and we're reading the same thing. And I think that is its primary value for something like what we're doing here today.
Amazing. Thank you. All right, we're gonna wrap up because we got to get to Musaf and to lunch. Lightning round.
Yeah.
Favorite passage of the Tanakh? You sticking with Psalm 148 or no? What you got?
Ruth. Yeah, the book of Ruth.
Yes, Ruth.
No, it's not my favorite. I don't have a favorite. Like, it's hard. Like,
Fair.
like that's like maybe like that's like a
Favorite kid. You can't answer.
yeah.
I get it.
You don't have, like no, but I read Ruth now. I have a lot of answers to this, but let's just for lightning round. Ruth. You have a group of people who are returning from exile and they're trying to figure out how to learn to live together.
Yeah.
And you've got one group of people, mostly represented in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, where they're like, you know what? The problem was, we talked to too many people. We like hung out with too many Babylonians, honestly, right? So Ezra and Nehemiah, like famously, are like, the intermarriages that are happening right now, you gotta go. All the Babylonian wives, you're out, right? At the same time, there is a group of people who are saying, yeah, but what about this story of Ruth? The Moabite woman, the foreigner, who marries in to the people. And we judge Ruth not as a Moabite, but we judge her because she is full of hesed, because she's full of the loving kindness, which is the thing that is used to describe God over and over and over again. It's like, so she has this deep faithfulness inside of her that is absolutely necessary. And then, brilliantly, the writer set this in the time of the judges. Right? I have a friend who's a Hebrew Bible scholar and he wrote a commentary on the Judges. His translation for the book of Judges, or the word Judges, is warlords. In the time of the warlords. That's essentially what it is, right? And you have a group of people where all of these geopolitical things are happening. Everyone is doing what's right in their own eyes. They can't do anything right. And then there's this anonymous Moabite woman who does everything right. And they can't do anything right. The judges continually fail. They do something right, and then it fails. And then by the time you get to the end of the judges, they're the worst. And then Ruth shows up, and in the last 4 verses of the Bible, of the book, they say, oh yeah, and she's the great-grandparent of David.
Right.
Which is like mind-blowing, right? Which is to say like, if you feel totally powerless in a world where warlords are making decisions on your behalf, where the political world does not make sense to you, and you're angry about it, look at Ruth, this faithful woman, who just by virtue of her faithfulness is able to turn the world, and will never know that she did. Like, that's a deep and rich idea that you could spend your whole life meditating on.
Amazing. Is there something from from your guys' side of the thing
Yes.
that you think we should all take a read?
Yes. So start easy, y'all. Like, don't go to the writings of Paul are confounding to Christians. Don't try and start reading.
Wasn't
those.
gonna. Yeah.
I think that probably the best place to start are the rabbinic parables of Jesus.
Okay.
Right, even the ones that you think you know, the idea that there's the parable of the Good Samaritan or the parable of the prodigal son, these are sort of widely known stories culturally, but reading them in the Bible gives you new details, and they're brilliant. But there are a bunch of weird ones that are awesome. There's one about a mustard seed where someone just starts planting mustard, which is a weed in the ancient Near East. That's really awesome. There's one about a persistent widow. So there's an unjust judge, and he's terrible, but then the widow keeps knocking on his door all night until he finally opens the door and gives her justice. There are all sorts of these wonderful stories. And so here's the resource I'm going to point you to. There's a wonderful scholar from Vanderbilt named Amy Jill Levine. She's a Jewish scholar, and she's a Jewish New Testament scholar. So she wrote a book called Short Stories by Jesus, and it's all about the parables. And what she does is she does these amazing readings where she roots out a lot of the historical anti-Jewish bias that's kind of wrapped itself around the readings, and instead says, Like, how would a first century Jew understand this story? Because it's being told by a rabbi in the first century. How would the audience then understand it? And then she, sort of with the power of her own brilliance, is able to breathe incredibly fresh life into these stories. So, short stories by Jesus. I think it's called the eccentric stories by a controversial rabbi or something like that.
Nice. Thank you. Pastor Elson, thank you so much for joining us and giving us some of your day today. And friends, this is no small thing. I really appreciate your patience and openness. What it means to be a part of community is to talk to one another, to learn about one another, and this is huge. And I really appreciate you all. You can all email me afterwards if you didn't like this. That's fine. But
you can email me too. Like, don't email him. Like,
but
as one clergy, can I just step in front of that and say, like, just email me and say,
just
like,
know we all hate the Romans. It's all the Romans' fault. But thank you for being with us. We really appreciate you being here, and wish you and your family a Shabbat Shalom. I'll see you in Shul tomorrow, or your church tomorrow.
Shabbat.
And friends, we are